In this video, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about in-text citations. In-text citations are the citations that you see when you're reading the actual text. When you're reading through the paragraph and you get to a spot where there are parentheses and there's an author's name and a year, that's called an in-text citation. An in-text citation is going to tell you that that piece of information in the text comes from a certain resource. And the citation that you see should match the resource on the references list. So in this video, I'm going to show you some examples of in-text citations, and I'm going to show you references lists and how we could create in-text citations based on the references list. So at this point, you should have already watched the second part of the video that you watched at the very beginning of the course that talks about citations. The other professor who went through, first he went through the references list and then he did some examples of in-text citations. So you have a little bit of background knowledge and we're going to move forward with that. If you look in resources in the APA folder, the APA format folder, the very last document is the document that I'm going to show you right now in the video if you wanted to go back and look at it again. So I'm going to pull that up first, and I'm going to talk through some of these in-text citations. So in another class that I teach, we do an activity with Rosa Parks, and because of that, I have a lot of resources about her. So several semesters ago, I created some examples based on that topic using some of those books. The first sentence that you see might be a sentence that you have in your paper, especially if you're writing about an event or about a person. You often will put maybe the date of the event or the date when the person was born or something like that. In this case, it says Rosa Parks was born in Alabama on February 4th, 1913. I don't need a citation. The reason I don't need a citation is that this piece of information could probably come out of any book you could find about Rosa Parks or any website you could find. So there really is no reason to put a citation because you could word it a bunch of different ways and it could still look exactly as it came from somewhere else. But no matter what, this could be seen as more of a common sense or common knowledge kind of piece of information. So you would not be in trouble if you were to put a sentence like this into your paper without a citation. Now, there are some examples of a date that you might need a citation. For example, I had a student once who did a paper on Shakespeare, and I think that either his birth date or one of the dates was one that was disputed in multiple sources. So in that case, she said that this source says he was born this time, and this source says he was born this time, and that would be an example of needing to use the sources because it was disputed. It wasn't the same date on every single place she looked. So this one doesn't need a source and it's okay. So let's move on. The second one, this example, and I'm going to separate these so it's a little bit easier to see. This is an example of a statement that does need a source because it may not be common knowledge. It says Rosa Parks' mom, Leona, was a teacher. Well, not every book or website or source that you read about Rosa Parks mentions her mom being a teacher. So I said that this piece of information came from the History Channel website. I cited it as history because that's how they had it on the website, 2015. And this is something I wrote. I did not quote it. It was my own words. So I set it up with just the author, which is history, and the year, which is 2015. If it was a quote, if I had used it as a quote, then I would add a page number or a paragraph number, which I'm going to show you in later examples. Notice that the citation comes at the end in this example, and that the period comes at the very end. So the period is going to come after the citation. A comma separates the author and the year. The next example is an example of a quote. A quote means that I took the words word for word from the source. So it's not my words, it's somebody else's. So I said, according to Ringgold, who is the author, the bus driver, whose name was James Blake, told Mrs. Parks to get up and give her seat to a white man. So let's look at this. I chose to put the author at the beginning of the sentence because I wanted to say according to Ringgold. So he is not part of the parentheses. Right after his name should go the year, the date. So Ringgold, parentheses, 1999. Then I have the quote. I have to make sure it's in quotation marks. The quotation marks end at the end of the quote, but notice there's no punctuation. So the period is going to still fall after the parentheses. So I have another parentheses at the very end to show that this quote came from page 13 of this book. When you have a quote, you always need to have a page number or a paragraph number. A page number is going to occur when you have a book or a journal article because it'll show the pages. You would use a paragraph number if it's from a quote from a website because there are no pages. So if I quoted this from, say, the history website, I would count the paragraphs and see, okay, it came from the 5th paragraph, and I would cite it that way, which I'll show you how to do. But, so again, you see the author's name, you see the year in parentheses, and then parentheses at the very end is the page number, with the period following everything. The next example is another example of me paraphrasing something. So this is not a quote, these are my own words. I've read the different sources about Rosa Parks, and I've typed my own paragraph about her. So I have some information, and it talks about Claudette Colvin, and this information I actually was able to find in 2 different sources. So if you look at the citation at the very end of these 2 sentences, you see that I've included 2 different authors. That's actually something that I encourage you to try to do, because what that shows is that you have read all of your sources and you've synthesized the information. So you've said that, oh, I've learned about Claudette Colvin in the Levine book and in the McDonough book and in this place and in this place. And, so you're synthesizing the information in that you're reading it in several places and you're putting it in your own words. So the way that you set up a citation that has multiple sources is that you do it alphabetically. So your sources should fall in the same order as they appear on your references list. In your references list, you've done it alphabetically. So you should do your in-text citations, if you have multiple, like this one, alphabetically as well. So Levine comes first because L becomes before M. I'm going to put the author's name, comma, the year. Then, to separate 2 different sources in one citation, I use a semicolon. Then again, I'm going to have the author. This is the second source that talks about Claudette Colvin, comma, and the year. They'll both be in the same set of parentheses, with a period at the very end. So this is something that I would hope that you would try to do, is to be able to paraphrase multiple sources together. So if you can find information in several places that supports each other, like this, so I can say that both of these books said this, then that's a good thing. This is an example of, again, using multiple sources to cite information. But you'll see that in the paragraph, I have to cite more often because the sources change. So the first sentence is in my own words. There's no quotation mark. And both these two authors said that. So both of them said that he was elected the leader of the boycott. It's in alphabetical order, and they're separated by a semicolon. But they're both in the same set of parentheses. Period at the very end. Then the next sentence talks about his home being bombed. Well, I was able to find that information in 3 different sources. So I cited all 3 of them. Separate each one by a semicolon. This last part of the sentence is a quote. So the first part, his home was bombed, that was my own words. And I said that these 3 people, these 3 sources said that. Because he had spoken out in favor of the boycott was a direct quote from this source. So because it was not in my own words, I have the author's name, the year, and the page where I found the quote. So on page 80, this author said, spoken out in favor of the boycott. Notice again that the quotation marks come before the citation, but the period comes after the citation. This is an example of something called a block quote. So, block quote is what it is. I just want you to see that what I'm saying, block quote. And the reason why it's called a block quote is because it ends up almost looking like a block. Now I'm going to delete that because I don't want you to think you put that there. But this would occur when you have a quote. So that means it's somebody else's words, it's not yours. That is 40 or more words. So if the quote is 39 words or less, then you would do it just like this in quotation marks. If it's 40 words or more, so 40 is your magic number, then it's going to look like this, where the quote is set apart almost in a block that's separated from the rest of the text. So let me get rid of that and let's talk about it. So I said that the Montgomery bus boycott reached beyond the borders of Alabama. Those are my words. But then I wanted to share a quote from a book that was more than 40. So if I highlight it, I can look down here and see that it's 53 words. So I know I have to put it in a block quote. So let's look at how it looks, and then I'm going to show you how to set up a block quote. Notice that something that's missing, even though it's a quote, is there are no quotation marks. So that's a difference. It is a quote, but there are no quotation marks. Because it's set up this way, we know that it's still a quote. So no quotation marks. The other thing that's different, if you look down here, the period this time is at the end of the sentence instead of after the citation. So that's another difference. I know that seems weird, and you think, well, why do they change it up for this one? But that's just one of those oddities when it comes to APA. I feel like sometimes they like to trick us. But this time, the period is going to follow the sentence. The citation is going to come at the very end, and it's still going to be set up like it would for a quote. So it's going to have the author's name, the year, and the page number. We have to have the page number because it's a quote. Okay, so this is a block quote. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to have the same quote, but I'm going to show you how to set it up. So if I'm typing my paper and I am adding a quote to my paper, I'm looking at a book and it's one that I want to use, and I put the quotation marks, and then I look back at it and I think, that looks a little bit long. Well, I can highlight it and look, see how many words it is. Well, 53, I know 53 is too much for it to just be a normal quote, so I have to make it a block quote. So the way that I do that is, the first thing I might want to do is delete the quotation mark because I don't need it for a block quote, and hit enter, because a block quote should start on its own line. Just one space down, double spaced, but it should be its own line. I'm going to take the quotation mark away there too. And I'm going to look at my period and say, oh, because it's a block quote, I want to put it after the sentence instead of after the citation. Now I have to make it look like the block. Well, to do that, I can highlight it, and I can go up to my paragraph settings, just like you did for the hanging indent on your references list. But instead of being over here, where hanging indent was, we're going to be over here. And where it says left, I want you to move it 0.5 over from the left. The right is going to stay at 0. So you're only moving the left-hand side 0.5. And click OK. And that moves your block quote over just on the left side, but it helps it look like it's set apart from the rest of your text. Now that's the end of my quote, and I want to continue on with my paragraph. I'm just going to hit enter, and then I'm going to start typing the rest of my paper. So you'll see that I have a sentence here that's left aligned, then I have my block quote, and then I start back left aligned again. Now, there are some instances where your block quote will be the end of your paragraph, and that's okay. So, if this is the end of my paragraph, then the next line starts a new paragraph. So I'm going to indent it, and then I'll just keep typing my paper. And you'll see that it starts a new paragraph, but then I'm back left aligned again. And eventually, when you have more information down here, it'll still look like this is set apart from the rest. Now, one thing to notice, I'm not using APA text. This is because I had set this up to be bigger so it would be seen if I was showing this to you in class. Obviously, you would need to make sure you had Times New Roman, 12-point font, where this is not. This was just to show you examples of citations. A couple more things before I end this video, just so it doesn't go too long. It's best to avoid having lots of block quotes. The reason I say this is because when you have a lot of block quotes in your paper, that means you have large chunks of text that were not written by you. They were written by someone else. And the more block quotes you have, the more parts of your paper that are not yours. They're just copied and pasted, basically, from another source. So while it's okay to have a couple block quotes, I suggest that you stay away from having lots of block quotes. When I read your rough draft, I'm going to probably say, you have too many block quotes. If you have a lot, think about rewording a few of them into your own words. That way it's not somebody else's work, it's your work. If we think about regular quotations, like this, those are okay to have. You can, of course, have them throughout your paper, but it's nice to have shorter ones like this, and then others that are your own words. So the goal is to have as much of your paper be paraphrased as possible. So why do we need citations for paraphrased work? Well, I think in the video it talked about this, the other video that you watched, and I'll reinforce the idea. But paraphrased work is in your own words, but it's not your own ideas. So even though this paragraph was written by me and not somebody else, it's not information that I just discovered on my own or made up. It's information that I found in sources. So I'm citing the sources for two reasons. One, I want to make sure that people who are reading this, know that I'm not trying to say that I made this information up. I'm giving credit to the sources. But two, I'm also saying that these sources support what I'm saying. So this information is more valid because these two authors also say it. So it gives my work some support. It gives it some oomph, some power, it's not just me making things up. It's me saying that Claudette Colvin refused to give up her seat, and these authors say that in addition to me saying it. So it's very, very important to cite your paraphrased work, even though you would think, well, it's in my own words. Yes, it is in your own words, but you didn't discover it. It's not original to you. It's not an idea that you made up. These are ideas that you found in other places that you're sharing with us. So these sources are supporting what you're saying. So I'm going to stop this video, and then the next video I'll show you how to look at a references list and construct the in-text citation. But at least this one gives you some examples of what in-text citations look like with multiple sources about one topic.